Raise your hand whenever you want. Not on command, but when you feel that you want to. You wait, nothing. And suddenly there it is. That small push from inside, that thought, now. The hand goes up. You felt the exact moment you decided. You're certain of it because it's the most obvious thing in the world. Your brain began that movement before you found out about it. Your entire life rests on that one assumption. You take credit for what you decided. You are ashamed of what you decided. Courts convict people for what they decided. We all accept the same order of events. Decision first, then the act. And when researchers wired people up to electrodes and examined the actual order of events, it turned out to be the other way around. So who really makes your decisions? In 1983, a man sat people down in front of a fast-spinning clock and wired their heads to electrodes. He intended to measure something nobody had ever tried to measure, the order of events. His name was Benjamin Libet. He worked at the University of California, San Francisco, and his request sounded trivial. Flex your wrist whenever you like. Then tell me where the hand of the clock was at the moment you first felt the urge to move. He measured 3 moments: when the muscle moves, when the person feels they decided, and when brain activity begins. Muscle activity came last. People became aware of their decision about 0.2 of a second before the movement, and the signal in the brain, the so-called readiness potential, was starting more than half a second before the movement, roughly 1/3 of a second earlier than the person even felt they were deciding anything. You didn't feel yourself decide. You felt yourself being informed of a decision. Maybe you think that's the fault of old electrodes. So let's turn up the resolution. In 2011, Itzhak-Fried's team listened in on individual neurons in the brains of people who, for medical reasons, had electrodes implanted deep in their cortex. Single neurons changed their activity more than a second before the person reported any urge to move. From the activity of a few hundred such cells, it was possible to predict what they were about to do before they knew it themselves. In 2008, John Dylan Haynes put people into a scanner and had them freely choose, left button or right. Patterns of activity in the prefrontal cortex gave the choice away as much as 7 seconds before the person felt they were making it. 7 seconds. But I'll honestly say what almost nobody adds. The accuracy of those predictions was around 60%. A coin flip gives you 50. So this is not a machine reading your mind. It's a slight but real tilt of the scales, long before you feel yourself choose. Haynes himself warned that this doesn't settle the question of free will. You're probably thinking now, fine, but these are trivialities. A finger twitch, a random button, real decisions look nothing like that. Who I'll love, where I'll live, whether I'll walk out of this job, those I weigh consciously for hours. Hold on to that thought, because there's something worse than not knowing when you decide. Worse is not knowing why. In 2005, the Swedish researchers Peter Johansson and Lars Hall showed people pairs of photographs of women's faces. One question, which one is more attractive? The person pointed, and the researcher handed them the chosen photograph and asked them to explain their choice. Except in some of the trials, with a magician's sleight of hand, he handed over the other one, the rejected one. In roughly 3 out of 4 such trials, people didn't notice the swap at all, and they began explaining why they had chosen the face they hadn't chosen. Because she has a warmer smile, because she looks friendlier, because I've always liked blondes, said a man who a minute earlier had pointed at a brunette. They said it fluently, in detail, with total conviction. And asked beforehand, 84% of them had said they would definitely catch a swap like that. Their brains did exactly what yours does, every day, hundreds of times. They were handed a done deal and instantly manufactured a reason for it. Because when your brain doesn't know the real reason, it doesn't say, I don't know. It invents, fluently, instantly, and without a shred of doubt. The purest proof came from patients whose connection between the hemispheres had been severed. Michael Gazzaniga showed an instruction only to the hemisphere that cannot speak. The word walk. The patient stood up and walked. Then the researcher asked, why did you get up? The answer came from the speaking hemisphere, the one that never saw the instruction. And instead of admitting it had no idea, it invented a reason on the spot. I'm going to get a Coke. The patient wasn't lying. He believed it. Gazzaniga called this mechanism the interpreter, a part of your brain whose only job is to assemble a sensible story out of what the body has already done. You're not the chief executive handing down orders. You're the press secretary who finds out about the decision and walks out to explain it to the world. And he's so good at it that he fools himself. That leaves one more question, one that people rarely dare to ask. If the brain invents the reasons, then where does the very feeling that you did it come from? that sense of authorship you have right now in your hand. The American psychologist Daniel Wegner set out to manufacture that feeling artificially. He sat a participant and a helper on either side of a single mouse and had them move a cursor over pictures together. The participant was convinced the other person was just another volunteer. He wasn't. At set moments, it was the helper who stopped the cursor alone on a specific picture. And a second or two earlier, the participant heard through headphones a word naming that very picture. And then something happened that should unsettle you. People reported that they had wanted to stop there. They felt they had made a decision they hadn't made. All it took was a thought at the right moment and a movement that happened to match it. The feeling that you are the author isn't a readout of reality. It's a separate feeling, manufactured by the brain whenever a thought and an action land close together. And if it can be triggered artificially, it can never be proof that you truly caused anything at all. Sit with this for a moment. Every reason you have ever given, why you took that job, why you loved that person, why you left then, why you stayed then, they all felt true to you. They all arrived after the fact. And there's something in that worth remembering. You carry decisions you blame yourself for. You go back to them at night and ask yourself how you could have. Well, that you, who was supposedly at the controls back then, is far harder to locate than you assumed. Your guilt rests on a certainty that science has never found. I have to do justice to Libet himself now because he never claimed that free will doesn't exist. He pointed out something everyone else missed. Yes, the brain starts first, but between the moment you notice it and the movement itself, there's still a fraction of a second left. And in that fraction, you can say, no. Libet called it free won't. You don't choose what comes into your head. You choose what you let through. In 2016, a team in Berlin taught a computer to recognize that rising signal live, and the instant it detected one, it flashed a red light at the participant. Stop. People were able to halt, even when the brain was already on its way. There was only a point of no return, some 0.2 of a second before the movement, past which canceling was impossible. Up until that moment, the veto worked. And now, the story turns. Because for 40 years, Libet's experiment was sold to you as scientific proof that free will doesn't exist. The foundation under that proof began to crack, and it cracked from inside science itself. In 2012, Aaron Scherger published an analysis that overturned the interpretation of that famous signal. Your brain's activity is constantly rippling. It hums randomly, up and down, without pause. And a spontaneous movement happens. When one of those random waves crosses a certain threshold, the researchers were averaging their recordings backwards in time, starting from the moment of movement. If you only look back from the moments when the noise happened to peak, you'll see a beautiful, smooth rise on the graph. But that rise isn't a plan. It's a shadow cast by the way you're looking. It's as if you averaged only the waves that happened to knock down a sandcastle and then announced that the sea had been preparing for it. So the famous readiness potential may not be an unconscious decision at all. It may be noise that happened to tip the scale. And now go back to your thought from earlier, the one where you insisted that real decisions are different. In 2019, Uri Maoz and his team decided to test that head on. They compared two kinds of choices. Trivial ones, Libet style, press when you feel like it, nothing rides on it. And real ones. Decide which charity gets actual money. For the trivial choices, the readiness potential appeared as usual. For the decisions that genuinely mattered, it vanished or was dramatically weakened. The signal that was supposed to abolish your free will shows up when the decision means nothing and disappears when it starts to mean something. So you were right. Except that isn't good news at all. The problem didn't go away. It moved. Science did not prove that you are a puppet. Science went looking for the moment in which you decide, and it did not find that moment. Before you're aware, there's activity in the brain, but no commitment yet. By the time you become aware, the movement is already underway. Between the two, there is no line. There is no second you could point to and say, here is where I stepped in. The decision has no address in time. And your whole life, you assume there was one because you can feel yourself living in it. And maybe that feeling is the whole answer. Maybe the I that decides isn't an event you can catch at a particular second. Maybe it's a story your brain writes without pause, stitching it onto things the body has already started doing, not to deceive you, to keep the whole thing hanging together. So raise your hand again. And this time, try to catch not the moment the hand moves, but the earlier one. The moment you decide. Hunt for it. You won't catch it. You never have. All these years you've felt yourself sitting behind the wheel, but every time you turn around to check, the seat is empty, and your life goes on anyway. You choose a job, a city, the person you'll grow old beside, and you will never know whether you truly chose any of it, or whether you were simply the first to find out.